Good morning again. Thank you for being here. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. I've got some prepared remarks, and then at the close of the remarks, we will have microphones for those that have questions. Now, this session is being recorded, so please, if you raise your hand and have a question, hold on until you get the microphone, until you ask the question, okay? Because we want to record this. Also, next week, between services, we're going to have kind of a repeat of this session. Next week, we will spend more time talking about the budget. Next week, we're almost done. There's a couple of little details we've got to figure out. So next week, we'll get more into details on the budget. And then on the 28th, we'll have our congregational meeting. So just so everybody knows the kind of the timeline. Some of you probably remember Don Wigg. And Don had a really, really profound saying that I've tried to take to heart. And Don always said it was a privilege to serve. It's a privilege to serve. Some days it may not feel that way, but it is a privilege to serve. And I feel very privileged to be up here as the congregation's acting president when I look out and see people that I've known and loved and cared for almost 60 years. Former Sunday school teachers. It's just real humbling. And what I bring, I think, to this discussion is the observation that Trinity is a very strong congregation. I have seen that for decades, as you have. We are a family. As families, we might argue. As families, we might quarrel. But I want you to think back, those of you that are veterans, and think of some of the struggles and some of the quarrels we've had in the past. What's amazing to me about Trinity is after those struggles, this congregation grew and became stronger. I'm not afraid of conflict. I'm not afraid of quarreling if it's done properly, if it's done in the open, if it's done up front. That's healthy and that is good. So, I am going to probably be a little more blunt than you're probably used to in terms of comments from up in the pulpit. But here it goes. What I'm going to do is start us back approximately March and give you a timeline approximately, because in some cases I don't have exact dates, about what's gone on behind the scenes, what council's been doing or not doing, the discussions we've had, and then I'll bring us up to today, and we'll talk about what we expect to be happening in the upcoming months and upcoming year or so. Okay, let's go back approximately to March. At that time, it became clear that Pastor Hance was approved for his sabbatical, which meant we were going to have a gap starting in January 1 for about 4 months. In March, Pastor Paul Erdahl was under a contract that was scheduled to expire right about now. So back in March, and again, I want you to put yourselves back in that timeline. Back in March, we're the council. Pastor Paul is theoretically going to disappear in November, and we have no pastor starting in January. That is a problem. So we started talking amongst ourselves in the council about one of two things. Maybe extending Paul's contract, if he was interested, or maybe even going back a second time and offering him a call. Nothing certain, nothing definite. As you know, the council can't call a pastor. The council can call a meeting to vote on it, but we have to get 2/3 of us to agree. So starting in March, Jim Koski and I especially started spending a lot more time with Paul, watching him in council meetings, watching his interaction. I began to think that, you know what, it might work to have him as senior pastor. It might make sense to extend to him a call. This was discussed at the May 18th council meeting, very upfront. At the time, Julie Anderson really stated it best. She said, let's reach out to Paul and see if he would be amenable to a call if you all approved it. 2 days later, Jim Koski and I met with Paul and had that discussion. Would you be amenable to a call if one was given? Paul was very positive. We had a very good discussion. He wanted a couple of weeks to think about it. I left the meeting thinking he was going to say yes. Subsequent to that, Paul had discussions with other members of the council, and they were left with the sense that he was going to be favorably disposed to a call. Time went on. He asked for a little more time. Eventually, as you saw in his letter, he declined to be amenable to that call. He declined. So, one rumor I want to completely dispel, because I've heard it from a number of individuals, that the council tried to drive out Pastor Paul. Absolutely incorrect. We were favorably disposed, and at the May meeting wanted to pursue the potential of a call. So, the council was favorably disposed at that time to going back to the congregation sometime this fall and offering, bringing it before the congregation. So I want to completely set that one, put that one to bed, that the council tried to drive off Pastor Paul. Another rumor that I've heard, that Pastor Paul and Pastor Hans did not like each other, they didn't get along, and they had a big fight. Well, like a lot of rumors, there's a little bit of truth to that, because they did have a very loud argument in the church office, and it got pretty heated. However, what gets missed is the next day, they spent 2 hours together in what, after talking to both of them, could best be described as reconciliation. Now, how many here have ever had an altercation with a spouse where it's been more than 2 days since you patched it up? Anybody raise your hand? So, you see my point. I will also point out, for those of you, and I'm pretty much everybody here, who's been, coming to church and watching the interaction between Paul and Hans, I would say it's more than collegial. I would say it's friendly. You've seen them up here together. You've seen them banter. You've seen them head down the aisle. But there's one other thing I want to share with you about Pastor Hans that very few of you know. As you recall, after the unsuccessful vote to call Pastor Paul a couple of years ago, Pastor Hans, on his own, seeing the division that occurred in the congregation with the Pastor Hans faction and the Pastor Paul faction. Hans saw that. On his own initiative, he reached out to Paul, started meeting with him, had coffee, got to know him. After a few weeks of this, he said to me, I could work with that guy. So the whole process by which Paul kind of came back under contract really was initiated by Pastor Hans. He reached out. So with Pastor Hans and Paul's relationship, my opinion, what I saw was amicability. If you have other questions about what each said to the other or want more of that information, I'll give you Pastor Paul's cell phone. You can reach out to him individually. Okay, now let's continue. We have Pastor Hans going on sabbatical. Now let me just do a quick aside. As you sadly may remember, Pastor Hans and his father were going on this journey together. So is Pastor Hans going to go on the journey alone or with somebody else? I don't know. As recently as Friday, Hans doesn't know. He's not even thinking about that. But we are operating as though he, in fact, is going on sabbatical. We need a pastor during Hans' sabbatical. We looked at some other options. Could we just do it ourselves? Could we get maybe Pastor Dave back? Could we look at other clergy? Our view from council was no. Who is going to do pastoral care in the middle of the night when there's a death? Who's going to be running from the pastoral side confirmation? Who is going to be doing the ongoing pulpit supply? It simply wasn't feasible. We didn't think to try and fake it. So, we were very fortunate. Bishop Amy put us in touch with a pastor named Bob Russert, who you shortly will meet, a real heavy hitter. Extensive administrative experience, extensive credentials in a lot of things that I'll talk about in a few minutes. His contract he's scheduled to start December 1. Now, let me get into some Bob Russert rumors. One of the big ones I've heard was that Jim Koski went behind the council's back and negotiated with Bob Russert and did this without council approval. Nonsense. The council voted and authorized Jim Koski to negotiate with Bob. The council approved unanimously the contract. Now, the contract is expensive. Won't deny it. And I agree 100%. And I've had a number of calls, a number of face-to-faces, but the contract's expensive. But then I would ask you, what was the alternative? We will have a very sound, very professional, very experienced interim pastor. Now, next question I get. When will we form a call committee? When are we going to start looking for the next senior pastor? I don't know. One thing that you'll see different in the budget is our budget we're projecting only for 6 months. We don't know what's going to be happening. Our numbers are down. Our giving is down. There's some signs it's coming back, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But we don't think it's prudent to guess 12 months out. We're going to plan for the next 6 months. We're going to plan for, Pastor Russert being here that time period. We're going to get just things stabilized. At that point, as the council and as you, the congregation, see fit, when appropriate, perhaps at that time, we will start focusing on another senior pastor. I say perhaps, and I want to be realistic with you. We might not have the finances to call a senior pastor. I think we will, but I'm not going to start a project that I don't know I can't pay for. So, it's going to be challenging. As the bishop has told me, they're retiring 1,000 pastors a year and graduating about 300. So the pastor pool is shrinking. But when we're going to start the call process, unknown. We will start addressing that probably second and third quarter. Again, nothing behind your back. We will certainly involve you in the process. Now, I've mentioned our budget a couple of times, and as I said, I'm not prepared to get into the nuance of the budget today. Next week, you can fire away. But some things I want to talk about. We have gone back and taken a real serious review of pretty much everything in the budget, and we're going to be making some changes. For example, office hours are probably going to be changed. Staff assignments is probably going to be changed. We're going to have to do things differently if we have a reduced budget. Now, shame on the council for not keeping you up to date. If you read the bulletin, there was nothing in the bulletin the last year about any budgetary issues. There are. And we're going to change what's in the bulletin to give you a much better idea. And shame on us when at council we're talking about deficits. Shame on us when we haven't even had the faith to come to you and share that there's a deficit. And can we work this out? What can we do giving-wise, etc.? We'll talk more on this in the future. Paul Larson suggested the 6-month budget. I think that made a lot of sense. As you saw in the bulletin today, there's going to be fewer mailings. There'll be more electronic delivery. Again, people that want something mailed to them, certainly we will accommodate that. Another situation relating to money, there was a concern that we weren't doing an adequate job in terms of securing the money given by the members. The loose offering, the change, the dollars, was not being counted under what's called a dual control. In other words, we had one individual counting the approximately $25 to $30 a Sunday in loose offering. That has now been changed. That is now under dual control, which is just a fancy way of saying we have two people keeping an eye on that. In addition to that, we are, as a council, going to be looking at money overall. When you donate money to this church, when you buy something from the bake sale, when you make a contribution to a cause, you have the right to be assured that that is being accounted for properly, that's being budgeted properly, and is being dispersed properly. And frankly, my view is we've gotten kind of sloppy about that. No, I'm not talking about being harsh or being negative. I'm talking about just being good stewards of all of our money. So I'll be working with council, and we'll be looking at virtually everything financially in terms of money coming in. How is it assessed? How is it categorized? How is it budgeted? And how is it dispersed? So that is another initiative. Okay. That's the end of my lecture. Again, we will, if you have a question, please raise your hand. We've got the ushers with microphones. Again, this is being recorded, So please don't ask your question until you've got the microphone. With that said, questions? Lois, we need a microphone. Up front, Clemens. Would you open them?
I would like to know why our intern left early.
Why did our intern leave early? Good question. And fortunately, I get to punt on that question, and I'll let the bishop handle that one.
Interns are placed by the seminaries where they are learning and being formed. And the seminaries do those placements in cooperation with their home synods, the place where each student is being followed. Each of our 65 synods in the ELCA have candidacy committees. And so it's a cooperative effort between the intern's site, the intern's candidacy committee, and really under the whole umbrella of the seminary. And I think with I'm saying I think, it would appear to me that because Pastor Paul's call here was his term, his contract, the covenant you had with him was coming to an end, and he was not seeking call here, that left the seminary saying, all right, what's going to happen with our intern that we're responsible for shaping and forming? And so that was a seminary decision along with his candidacy committee. He's not a candidate in this synod. Our candidacy committee does not follow him. I believe he's from eastern North Dakota, Fargo area. And so that's a decision that maybe we don't all know the conversations that went on, but I'm certain that the seminary was feeling responsibility to his continued learning and formation. And with a intern supervisor that was not going to be in place anymore, they saw that a change needed to be made.
I've got a couple of written questions I'd like to respond to. The first question is, we have a call committee. Why do we have one if we as a congregation are not going to follow the call committee's recommendations? What this question is referring to was the call committee recommended to council that a call be issued to Paul Erdahl. The second step in that process is bringing it to the congregation, of which is a 2/3 vote is required. That's what our Constitution says. So the question then is, why have a call committee if we as a congregation are not going to follow their recommendations? The short answer is because 2/3 of the attendees of that meeting did not want to issue a call. To my knowledge, in the 125 plus year history of this church, that is the first time that has occurred. So again, for those of you that put time and effort into that call committee, it is disappointing. Much time and much effort was expended, absolutely. But as Don Wigg says, it's a privilege to serve. Another question. I would like an answer as to what the rift was between Pastor Paul and Pastor Anderson. After that occurred, I'd had discussions with both of them and with office staff. And I'm not going to respond, I'm not going to give an answer to this question. It had to do with personalities, it had to do with perceptions, it had to do with things that individuals said to other individuals based on confidential information that had been provided to one or more of them. It's a he said, she said situation, and I'm just not going to go there. Again, if you want to pursue that, number one, talk to Pastor Hance. Number two, I'll give you Paul Erdahl's phone number. Please call. Other questions?
You kind of answered my question. I also want to say that I think it's really wise that you guys are doing the 6-month budget. Doing the 6 months planning, I think, is very smart, and I commend the board for their actions of that. My question was going to be, did Pastor Paul give a reason why he wouldn't entertain a call?
Did Pastor Paul give a reason why he wasn't going to entertain a call? All I can do is share with you what he said to me when I asked that question. He said, it has nothing to do with anyone here at Trinity. That's what he told me. That's all I can relate.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make one more comment, because I'm going to single out Matt as someone that I view as part of the solution. Matt, I'm going to just back up a minute. As I've noted several times throughout my discussion here, I've heard a lot of rumors, just kind of stuff that was crazy stuff. And what frustrates me is why people listen to that and just don't call the person involved. Matt Qualley, the day after the congregational meeting when we voted down Pastor Paul, the day after, he reached out to me, mad as a hornet, and said, what the heck are you doing? We got together and had breakfast, and we've had a few more discussions like that. When he calls me with a question, I know he's got a question, but I respect that, because I know he's not whispering behind our backs. If you've got questions and hear silly stuff, find out. That's what's healthy about Trinity. So, Matt, you're part of the solution. Thank you. Any other questions?
That answered my question a little bit too, but also when there's meetings between pastors like that, is there anybody that goes in with them at that time to, when you're having a major discussion like that, somebody that would be appointed, whether it's the council, to be that third person in a discussion so that the he say, we say, all that gets squashed?
Is there a process or a recommendation that when there's going to be those kinds of sessions, is there a third person to be brought in as kind of the referee or the umpire or whatever? The answer is yes and no. The situation that resulted in the rift was pretty spontaneous. I mean, there was no prior, gee, we're going to have a fight. It's not like, in junior high, there'd be a, fight behind the football field at 3:30, come watch. It wasn't that type of thing. That said, clearly, if there would have been from our perspective, a pattern of tensions or issues building up, most of you know me, I wouldn't have been averse at all to kind of getting the two of them by the scruff of the neck and let's sit down and get this talked about. It was pretty spontaneous.
Another question I have is the council, a matter of checks and balances and job descriptions. The council is in charge of watching staff to make sure that they're doing their jobs as put about by a job description. Do we have those? And who's in charge for checks and balances as far as when those things are getting done, or maybe somebody's overstepping their bounds and getting in somebody else's biz or whatever? Okay, that's my question.
The question is, yes, we have job descriptions. Can we do a better job as council of making sure that the appropriate tasks are being done by the appropriate person with the appropriate amount of time? I think we can improve with that, and many of the tasks, what I'm going to propose to council is that we take a look at virtually every staff task and say to ourselves, who is doing this? Should it be done by another person or another entity? Because I think our staffing model, I think a lot of what we do is well suited to 1965. I think we're doing a great job for 1965. But I think that needs to be looked at much more closely, yes. Brett. Fire away.
Hear me better? See, I'm pretty loud anyway. But after his recovery, was he doing the tasks that we hired him for, the administrative tasks? And my second question really is, would the church ever consider only having one pastor? Personally, I don't think it should, just because I think we're big enough and we have a lot of needs, but is there that thought at all?
Appreciate again the candor with that, Britt, that you ask. I see why you and Matt make such a good team. If I may paraphrase the question, was Pastor Paul doing the job that the job description called for? I would say he was trying. The trauma from the stroke, I never knew Pastor Paul prior to him coming on board. I wasn't involved with call committee. People on the call committee have said to me in gentle, loving terms that the Pastor Paul they dealt with in the call process wasn't the Pastor Paul of after the stroke. And that is sad, and that's unfortunate. But I can't speak to his job performance, no. Secondly, your question on one pastor, whether we go to 2 pastors or 3 or 4, that's going to be up to us.
Just a little bit of extra what Andy was talking about. Many of you know I do greet quite a bit at the door, and Pastor Paul would oftentimes come out maybe for about 10 minutes earlier, and we would visit. I got along with him quite well. And he was telling me a couple of times that it's a little frustrating for him because he felt that maybe he was only at about 80%. So that perhaps gives you an idea, and that comes from him, and I'm just repeating it to you.
There's a question over there that...
Mine will be really quick. I know part of the rift that's happened in Trinity started with the call committee, and I was a member of the call committee, and after the meeting, when the failed extension to try to extend the call to Pastor Paul, when that failed, I think some of the rift was because of the coterminous issue with Pastor Hans. Has there been any thought of trying to rewrite the Constitution to get rid of the coterminous? I think if that, the way the coterminous worked is when a senior pastor would be called, within 6 months, Pastor Hans would have to present a resignation letter. And then that resignation letter comes to the congregational vote. And it's up to the congregation to accept or reject his resignation. That's the way I assume, that's the way I believe it would work. So I think part of that made the congregation afraid of losing Pastor Hans, which I don't think we were in danger of losing Pastor Hans whatsoever, because the congregation wouldn't have voted for it. So has there been any thought of changing that?
Has there been any discussion at council? You can just come up.
The resignation part of that with the 6 month is only if a pastor has been called. And if you recall, Pastor Paul was not called, he was under contract. So just to clarify that, we're not in that position now. Yeah, okay. It has been discussed in council about the pastor, co-pastor, senior pastor, and so forth.
But if we don't address that problem and fix it, how are we not going to have that same situation in a year from now?
You're right.
That's my point.
You're right.
That needs to be addressed and be brought out in the open and have everybody realize that whole coterminous thing is not a big deal.
Yeah. I agree with you, Matt. I just wanted to clarify that we were not in that situation because Pastor Paul had not been issued a call. Yeah. But we will at a point. Yep.
I agree, Matt. Personally, I'm not in favor of that provision. So trust me, that will get a hearing.
Can you clarify a rumor for me?
Please.
I was at the vote when the call committee brought forward Pastor Erdahl's name. And I watched people stand up and start talking against voting for Pastor Erdahl and following the call committee. I heard rumors that there were people in the congregation calling one another behind the scenes to tell people not to vote for Pastor Paul. Now, if that's true, shame on us. But I really would like to know, did that happen?
So the question is, was there a kind of an orchestrated campaign to get people here to vote against Pastor Paul? Am I characterizing your question correctly? So the question was there a campaign to make sure Pastor Paul wasn't voted in? I don't know. All I can do is speak for myself. I voted against it because I was opposed to the process. I said that to several people before the meeting. I explained why I was against it. I was not aware of any phone calling campaign or going to different groups within Trinity to lobby against Pastor Paul. I wouldn't have done it because I didn't know the man, never met him. So I can't answer that. If others of you were familiar with that, saw that, or aware of it, maybe you should reach out afterwards and talk about that. Other questions?
Good morning. I think going forward, a church of this size should have a personnel committee made up of members of the council and whatever. I think that personnel committee should review the job descriptions for each position and then set up a timely fashion where they would review and sit down with the person being reviewed so that there's no question as to was this person doing their job or weren't they?
The question or the comment was about the formation of a personnel committee, and then that committee or some form of it be involved in the ongoing sort of administration and making sure that individuals are, performing and getting the appropriate feedback. I agree. We can do a better job as leadership within the organization. And we have had personnel committees in the past, and many of us have been on that. So, yes, I think personnel committees are very useful if they're, properly tasked and kept in the loop of what's going on. Other questions?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a loud voice too, like Brett. Yes? Okay, here we go. My concern probably is not so much a question as with regard to finances. I always believe that people need to be well aware of the financial situation. And I think making people well aware is important so they don't assume that everything's okay. If you don't know the numbers, you're probably going to assume that there's no financial need, and we need to talk about it. So that in the bulletin weekly, whatever it might be, but especially I think weekly, people pay attention to that, that we're well aware of where we're standing with regard to our budget and how we're doing with regard to income and so forth. So if we're not aware, we assume everything's just fine and there's no financial need. Everything's coming in and we're paying our bills. And I'm not sure that we're doing a good job of that either.
I think we're doing a terrible job of that. And I want to change what's in the bulletin to reflect year-to-date giving, year-to-date expenses. Where are we at? Agree completely. Sandy, I think. What did I mean when I said I wasn't in agreement with the process used with the call committee? I'm hesitant to do that because I don't want to get into that argument about what transpired, 2, 3+ years ago. Privately, one-on-one, seek me out. I'd be happy to go through that with you because there are two sides of that story. And if I get to spout why I was opposed, well, then it's only fair that somebody here who disagrees with me, then they get a chance. And I just don't think that's going to move us forward. Privately, I'd love to chat with you about my concerns about the process.
I just had a question about, and maybe this can't be done, but our intern that we just had, is there any chance that he could come back when we have this new pastor coming in? Or doesn't that qualify?
Is there any chance that intern Matt could come back? Amy, you want to handle that one?
We have to honor what his seminary and what his candidacy committee has already made a decision regarding. Now, once he graduates from seminary, there is this big call process that happens within the ELCA. As you mentioned, we don't have enough of our graduates, coming out to fill the need across 65 synods in the United States and the Caribbean. And so we try to do things as equitably as we can. And there's no guarantee where he will be assigned, you see. He's from eastern North Dakota. He goes back to eastern North Dakota to start the negotiation, meet with his bishop to see where the needs are in that synod. And if he desires another place, then those bishops, bring that forward to Region 3. We're in a region with it's all the ODAs. It's North Dakota, and they're 2 synods. South Dakota is 1 synod, and then we have the 6 synods in Minnesota. That's a Region 3. So if that bishop doesn't have a placement or he's not willing to serve, it's then brought to the region. And each bishop comes with all of their needs that they have before them. In our last there's 4 assignment processes during the year with seminary graduates. And at our last assignment process, we came with 2 first call settings. And we sat back when we listened to South Dakota telling us they had 17. And we thought, then we yield to our friends in South Dakota that need to find some pastors. So you see, there's equity that we share as part of the body of Christ in this denomination. So no, it's never a done deal. You can't say, we've got this lovely call and a person that we all see can fit into it. It doesn't work that way. We have to be a part of the body and seek to work together of where the need is and where the students' preferences are. And remember, always remember, the Holy Spirit is in the midst of it.
Other questions? Shelley?
The next question, we're going to charge you. You can only have short ones.
One question that I know people are thinking about and they're not asking is, why did Jim Koski resign?
Why did Jim Koski resign? I don't know. I have not directly asked him that question. I will share this, though. In his last couple of years, the amount of time and effort and work he's put in probably rivals that of some, if not most, of our staff. Jim worked hard. Jim did a lot. Jim, for example, came through on Wednesday night to help out with the service. Jim's been a faithful, strong, loyal member of this congregation. I don't know why he resigned. How do you think I like being Gerald Ford? So, Jim, it's a privilege to serve, and as I said the other day, and I'll say it again, as you see Jim, thank him for his service. He worked hard. He put in a lot of hours and did a lot. If you still have curiosity, ask him. I've got his phone number. Thanks, Shelley, for bringing that up. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Shall we close with a prayer? Dear Lord, thank you for this church. Thank you for the people here. Thank you for the opportunity to do your work. Thank you, Lord, that people here care enough to ask, to show up, and to support. Bless our church. Amen. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you, Bishop Amy, for helping, and thank you, Ann.